I'm Wilson Lai.
I'm Benjamin Yap.
I'm Patrick Zweig.
Oh.
Okay, got it.
I'm Art Donaldson.
I'm Tashi Duncan.
I'm Patrick Zweig.
And you're listening to Deep Cut.
On Deep Cut, we compare a director's most popular film with a personal favorite chosen by one of us.
We also discuss a director's life and career to bring context that helps us view their movies as they may want us to.
Please remember to subscribe to Deep Cut where you get your podcasts. Please rate and review us there because that also helps us keep making the show. You can keep up with us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Letterboxd at Deep Cut Pod. And you can join us to talk about movies on our Discord server, to which you'll find a link in the description. You can scroll back to see me have a little freak out after watching this movie.
Hey, Future Ben here. Before we get on to the rest of the episode, wanted to come in with a little announcement because we have something really special to share with everyone. We've just recently launched a Patreon. So if you're a big fan of the show and you would like to help us a little bit financially, we'd really, really appreciate it. We've been doing this show for 3.5 years and we want to keep it going. So any support would really help us keep making the show. You can find a link to the Patreon using the link in the description, or you can go to deepcutpod.com. And yes, we're also domain official finally. There you'll find our link tree with links to the show and all our socials, the Patreon, the Discord. Thank you, and back to the rest of the episode.
We've never done this before, boys. We've never decided on a director so fast and bumped him up our long-ass watch list or to get to list. We've never done this before, but for challengers and for Luca Guadagnino, we're doing it. So today we are going to be talking about the newly released Challengers. This is our first episode on Guadagnino. We are assuming, based on how well this movie is doing in theaters, that this will eventually become Guadagnino's most popular film. So we're just gonna jump ahead of the game and start off with this big film. Before we get into any information, I want to ask you guys what your thoughts on Guadagnino are.
Yeah, Guadagnino is actually pretty formative for me, and it's been a rocky journey with him. A big movie early on in my more academic film watching was 2015's A Bigger Splash, and I was really taken by the warmth and luscious details of that movie and just how poppy it was one of those, I didn't know movies could do that kind of experiences. From there, I saw I Am Love in the melodrama class that we all took together with Lisa Dombrowski, one of the greatest classes that I've taken to date.
Yes.
And that also, I think, is just the best food movie, period, maybe. And similarly warm and detailed and considerate. And then it was Call Me By Your Name. So from there, my impression of Guadagnino is as a thoughtful, exciting, but ultimately gentle art house auteur, like European art house classic. And then he makes Suspiria, which is a movie that we might wind up talking about. But for now, I'll just say you can find ample evidence online of the fact that I hate that movie.
Famously, Eli's most liked review.
Famously, he hated it.
I hated it so much that I got an essay published railing against it on Back Row Cinema Blog.
Check it out.
From there, I really fall off the Guadagnino train. I don't see Bones and All. I haven't seen We Are Who We Are. But with Challengers, I really feel like...
Wait.
Are we stopping?
We're stopping.
Okay.
We're stopping. We're letting them wait.
I'll leave it there. My relationship with Guadagnino is broken by Suspiria. Ben, how about you?
I don't really have much to say about Guadagnino. I don't really feel like I have much of a relationship with him as like a viewer of his films, although I've seen quite a few of these. I've even seen the TV show We Are Who We Are. And I think Guadagnino's profile is that he's a talked about director. So at least in the festival circuit, people will talk about his films because he has such strong star power behind them as well. Even though he's working in a European art house space, that it's inevitable that you need to talk about his films and that they will enter a pretty widespread public discourse despite being in that festival circuit space most of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I would say, I think maybe Call Me By Your Name was the first time I really like entered my radar as a budding cinephile or whatever. And I remember liking that movie, but then less than how other people were raving about it at the time. And I've seen the bunch of other Guadagninos, but I would say he never really clocked for me as like a major filmmaker, at least for me, like for my love of movies. He never really entered that, I guess you could call it like a personal canon or like personal influence. I don't know what you want to call it, but I think I always respect him as an auteur because there's a clear sense of craft to his films.
Totally.
Definitely.
Very stylish.
I really can't say he has ever left a deep impression on me. Yeah.
Wow.
So that's where I come from when it comes to Guadagnino. Yeah. And even though I've spent so much time with him, it's surprising that he has never left such a big impression.
What about you, Wilson?
Well, I've been similarly a big fan of Guadagnino to Eli, and so similarly to Eli, not to Ben. And Guadagnino, I don't know that man. Sorry.
Sorry to that man.
I started with A Bigger Splash as well. So similarly to Eli, I watched that before our class melodrama in the women's picture, where we saw I Am Love. Also, one of the best classes I've ever had at Wesleyan University. Incredible class.
Hear, hear.
And I think I was immediately struck by the way that his movies look and the way that his movies move from a camera perspective.
Yeah.
I was talking a lot about how A Bigger Splash has this sort of rhythm to it and this like spontaneity to the camera that I've only maybe had seen in like maybe Chungking Express at the time in my like, I don't know, film exploration. So I think that was like a major touchstone. And then prepping for the release of Call Me By Your Name like a lot by already being a Guadagnino fan and also reading the Andre Achiman book. Like I was setting it up to be a big deal for me, and thank God the movie like is incredible, and it was like my favorite movie of 2017.
And its stars are totally uncanceled.
I see a pattern here.
Yes.
Let me make a movie my personality before I watch it.
Well, I know I think there's a sort of a big loss that happens when a movie doesn't meet your really high expectations. But I'm glad with the two times that this has happened with Luca Guadagnino, it's worked out in my favor, which is great. I also saw his series We Are Who We Are and Bones and All, which I think Bones and All is sort of a lull in his filmography. And then we are here today. Before we start talking about challengers, I am going to do the briefest Guadagnino background because I wanted to structure this episode a little differently. So I was thinking about this a lot, and I was watching interviews with the cast of the film, which I never watched cast interviews, but I'm so obsessed with this movie that I watched so many cast interviews. And Zendaya was saying this one thing in one interview where she was like, I really love the way that Luca works with his creative collaborators. And I was like, boom. Why don't we structure this episode and go through department heads and similarly talk about each aspect of the craft of the film?
Love that idea.
So after I do my Guadagnino intro, we will just do a tiny bit of production context, and then we're going to just go into talking about the writing, the cinematography, the score, the production design, and the costume design, and then we'll round it out. Sound good?
Yeah.
Sounds great.
Okay, here we go. Luca Guadagnino was born on August 10th, 1971 in Palermo, Italy. He became interested in filmmaking at the age of 9, making amateur films from his mother's gift, which was a Super 8 camera. He finished university in the University of Rome with a degree in literature and cinema history and wrote his thesis on Jonathan Demme.
No way.
Someone important, even in this film.
That's funny because one of the moments in A Bigger Splash that really grabbed me as a young cinephile was when Ralph Fiennes looks into the camera, really shattering the fourth wall, but in a kind of Demi close-up-ish way, though those close-ups are not breaking the fourth wall.
Yeah, yeah. And also speaks to the Something Wild poster in the background of a certain Applebee's in this movie.
Yeah.
Demi's all over.
Didn't notice that.
Guadagnino has made 13 feature films, which include 5 documentaries. In addition to this, he directed the HBO series We Are Who We Are. Okay, the time is now. Game, set, match, as they say. I don't know. Let's play ball. Let's play.
That's how you end things.
The game is on. Yeah. Whoops. We gotta.
What are you talking
Go
about?
back. Rewind.
You play tennis.
I do play tennis. I was just too excited to
rewind
use
it,
my tennis terms. But the match is on, and let's talk about our thoughts on challengers. Ben, what did you think of this movie?
I thought this movie was very fun. I think I went with pretty solid expectations considering the buzz coming out from everyone, including you, Wilson.
Yeah, sorry.
And so I was expecting to be good. But of course, I've been disappointed before, having seen other films hyped up to the 9s and then going in and being like, eh. Not specifically from you, Wilson, but that has also happened before.
I mean, I'm sure it includes me.
I'm talking more of the general vibe of cine culture, yeah, which you are part of. I tried to set my expectations not too high going in, but I will say that actually the film did surpass my expectations for what I thought it could be. In terms of the filmmaking, the writing, the structure, and just how much fun Guadagnino has with the material, which I think is... I mean, it's probably the best film that he has made, to me anyway, because of just how elevated everything feels. Across the board, I think everything just works and it feels very well considered. And even though it's well considered, it's not well considered in a too precious way. It has this sense of experimentation, sense of fun that pervades the entire thing, which is really nice. And I think the big things that I take away from it are cinematography, editing, story structure. I think these are the big things for me that I think really make the movie stand out from Guadagnino's filmography and from other films as well. It's such an interesting film to be in this kind of structural format compared to other films that are also popular now, that kind of non-linear storytelling is not so common, I would say. And it's very difficult to execute well. And I think it's really executed quite well in this one. And I think it's I think it's just a really good time. Yeah, and I think that the narrative payoffs in this are like sublime.
Yeah, they really
You really
are.
see more non-linear experimentation in television these days than in film.
That's true. And I think also, like, when you talk about like flashback structure, the film has a very strong and complex flashback structure.
Yeah.
That's something that tends to trip up filmmakers and tends to be used in a way that actually makes films less interesting. This is definitely an example where it's used to heighten drama using informational reveals and to also like parallel things that are not happening at the same time, but like make dramatic sense together, which is really fun.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I
Yeah.
just think it's a really fun movie.
Well said.
Yeah.
Everything slots into place very beautifully in this film.
Totally agreed.
Eli, what did you think of Challengers?
Challengers both reminds me of and expands what I love and loved about Guadagnino's direction and his sense of movie making overall. His tactility, his knack for gesture and camera movement, his sense of fun, as Ben's saying, like it really feels like this was a joy to make, and it is a joy to watch. In terms of what it expands, whereas before I was saying that I initially viewed Guadagnino as solely an art house guy with some fun tendencies, Challengers makes me realize that he occupies a space closer to someone in a different medium like Charli XCX, or as I think of her, where she is operating in pop sensibilities, but with a very almost intellectual bent towards
Interesting.
self-aware art house construction.
Wow.
He really is straddling the line. And, you know, we've just been talking about Kiyoshi Kurosawa. I'm not positive when this episode is coming out chronologically compared to that, but he's another director who's crossing the line between art house and pop sensibilities to great, very gripping ends. And yeah, Challengers is just such a fun time. It really hooked me. It kept on getting better and better. And there are moments that we'll talk about, I'm sure, where it deepened itself.
Yeah.
And it's a great script.
Yeah.
It really, it's a total banger. I really love this movie.
I think about the universe in which mainstream Hollywood movies are all made like this.
Yeah.
Well, if we keep on giving him money, if we keep giving Luca Guadagnino money, it will be like this. This is the future that we can help create or foster.
I hope.
I wish his sensibility and what you're saying, Eli, this more artful sensibility with pop sensibilities, like the intersection was more widespread, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's really not.
I had a teacher in high school who once told me something that I think about a lot, which is that in order to be interesting at a party, you have to be able to bridge lowbrow and highbrow sensibilities. I think
love
that
that.
describes Guadagnino pretty cleanly.
What do you think of this movie, Wilson? But I think we already know.
Oh, boys. So, all roads leading up to Challengers were actually also leading up to me. I started playing tennis at 4 years old. And I played competitively up until graduating high school. So there is a very strong personal, I guess, tie-in to my life to this movie. So when I found out that Luca was making a tennis movie or a movie set in the competitive tennis world, I was immediately super, super hyped. And I think watching the film for the first time, really knowing very little about the film except for watching the trailers, what really shook me and struck me was the structure of that screenplay and how
Yeah.
fantastic it jumps back and forth, and how the story that it's telling in the flashback structure affects the match at hand in like present day. And it's incredible the way that it flows like water. It really doesn't stop. There are no scenes that you would cut. I did a whole like segment breakdown of the film on my third watch, which was last night, and I really can't find a section of this film that doesn't warrant itself to be there. Like everything makes sense and everything like
Yeah.
has a meaning in the grander scheme of things. I just think that when Guadagnino finds a screenwriter that just really knows how to work story, I think he's unbeatable and I think he's unstoppable. Yeah, this is hopefully the first of many collaborations that Luca will have with Justin Kreitsky's. But before we get into the specific writing of this film, just some brief context. So Justin Kreitsky's Challengers script landed on the blacklist in December 2021. Soon after, MGM bought the script and attached the film with Guadagnino and the three leads. So that was already all set. Zendaya also produced the film. and they shot the film in Boston in May of 2022, and it went on for about 2 months. The film was actually supposed to come out last year, but due to the actors' strike, they delayed the release of the film to this year. So let us start with the script and our writer, Tristan Kurtzkis, who is the husband of Celine Song, director and writer of last year's Past Lives. And I'm going to open with a quote.
Last year's Past Lives.
Last year's Past Lives.
Last year's Past Lives.
I'm going to open with a quote from Guadagnino. He went on the IndieWire Toolkit podcast, and this sort of ties into editing, but he said something that shocked me. It shook me. It actually shook me. He says that our first cut was only 3 minutes longer than the final cut, and it only took an hour to go down those 3 minutes, and then we were picture locked.
Oh.
He says, I have admiration. Justin Kurtzkis is fantastic. And that is maybe to speak to the power of the edit and his work with Marco Costa, but I think his meaning in that moment was to say that that script was tight as fuck.
Yeah.
Kurtzkis began thinking about challengers after seeing a very infamous US Open match between Naomi Osaka and Serena Williams, where Williams was given a warning and a violation for allegedly being sideline coached by her coach. That got Kurtzkis thinking about the fact that it's so crazy that you can't have a conversation with people on your team during the match. And what if there's something really important you have to say to your team, but what if it doesn't really have to do with the tennis at hand? So from then on, he started getting more and more into the world of tennis and started building this world around these three characters. He also says the screenplay acted as a blueprint. And I went through a lot of interviews, like with Marissa Lombardo, with Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, and they all said that they treated the script as like a Bible, as like words to follow, because it was so specific about what time of year or like what date or what place these scenes took place in. And Kurtzkis was really was really honing in on this in this interview with the No Challenges Remaining podcast. He was really honing in on the specificity of place and space, and I think he says that adds to the realism of the film, and it just like sort of develops their lives outside of what we see on their screen. But because they're tennis players, these players' lives are their brands, and what sponsorships they have indicate how well they do as a tennis player. So I thought that was also very, very interesting. Yeah, let's talk about this script.
I don't know where to start.
I mean, we could start talking about the bigger picture structure of the film, how this film is structured around a 3-set game between Art and Patrick, and how each of the sets you have someone who is leading. So in the first set, Patrick is leading, and we see flashbacks to the US Open when they were juniors and they were all very good tennis players, and meet Tashi Duncan for the first time at the US Open. And Patrick eventually wins her number by winning the US Open Singles Championship. And in the set that's being played, he takes the first set. And as we venture on in their lives, we see Art and Tashi in Stanford, and through an injury, Patrick gets pushed out of their lives, leaving space for Art and Tashi to thrive in their relationship, coinciding with a second set win by Art. And then the third set sort of follows the more, I guess, the closest flashbacks to the present day and the messiness that comes with. And we get into the tiebreak at the end. It's such a clean way of structuring this movie, and you can really track these character dynamics outside of the game, and also, I guess, more importantly, within this match.
I didn't know that the arc of their relationships follows the arc of that final match so closely. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
It's
Yes,
also
yes,
like
yes.
you're not just cutting to that match to like stuff that happens before, you're cutting to that match to other matches in the past. Like it's actually a very complex flashback structure, and I think it cuts based on relationships because it's cutting to the past. I can't remember specific examples right now, but the idea that, okay, here's a moment of tension between them in the current match. Let's go back to that tension between them in the past. And it develops this emotional / narrative arc that is not connected with what is happening in terms of linear time. Right? There is the film's emotional arc, which is not necessarily the same as the chronological history's arc. And so it's very much tied to the emotional payoff that Kritsky's and Guadagnino want you to have, which is very, very well done, I think.
I'm so impressed that the strong characterization does not get lost amidst all this complex flashing back, that you really can track how these characters feel about each other and the changes in their outlooks, both on each other and life overall, across all this jumping. A part of this movie is a kind of disillusionment of people moving past 30 and settling for a kind of disappointment and making do with that disappointment. That you get to see them move from 18 to like 34 or so while jumping through time and tracking competing relationships that go back and forth, and it's all clear. It is such a feat. And I know that's partially direction and performance, but it really does feel clear from Kritsky's script.
I'm thinking about those more complex cutting back and forth that happens later on in the film, like that segment where they're in the Art and Patrick are in the sauna, and then it cuts from them in the sauna the night before the match to the Atlanta Open a few years prior, and Patrick and Tashi getting together at the Atlanta Open with Art seeing them, and how those two conversations or instances and moments are in conversation with one another, but also are like the most important in informing the last like segment of the film or the match. It is, yeah, I think it's sort of operating on a really hard to achieve level, but I think with I guess the pacing of the edit and like how the dialogue flows and how we just sort of jump in and out of these flashbacks, it really like ends up working so well. I think it's because he's built up a grammar of this flashbacks earlier on in the film so simply, that when it happens in a more, I guess, jumpy kind of pace, it's still like we still understand what he's trying to do and we're not like confused.
I think what's interesting is what he shows and does not show in that flashback structure. Early on in the flashback structure, we have this kind of lead up to this match between Art and Patrick during that US Open. So it's this match that they don't care about, right? And at one point, Patrick is saying he'll throw the match so that Art can win. And that's the match that Patrick wins to get her number. We don't see that match. I think there's smart choices made about what are things that we show and what are things we just mention, right? So a lot is going on in the past, but we don't see all of it. But there's enough also just said and suggested that you get a sense of more than what you actually see. You can trace the arc of the relationship in the past with less material shown than you would expect, which is a kind of story economy that's very hard to find.
Another thing that helps with clarity is that each character's wants, strengths, and weaknesses are crystal clear. For Art, he wants what he does not have in Tashi, or later on, rest when he is being worked to the bone as a professional tennis player. He is good at being attentive and sensitive, but he lacks a lot of confidence and prowess. For Patrick, it's the opposite, where he seems to have a greater drive and ambition, but that may or may not really be true. He is good at the confidence and prowess, but he is not a sensitive and kind person, although Art isn't really kind either. So for Tashi, they make it super clear that she wants a degree of success and independence and control that is not afforded to her by the life-altering injury that she has. So from there, she has to rely on a strength that she's not really in control of, which is the attraction these two men have to her. And ultimately, she's trapped by this situation. One of the pivotal moments of the script to me is when late in the runtime, Art and Tashi are having a conversation about this match that Art is going to have with Patrick the next day, the big final match that frames the entire movie. Mm-hmm. Art basically misunderstands Tashi by comparing her to Jesus, and then the camera cuts super wide to indicate that it's off. The vibes are wrong, and he is sorely misunderstood his wife. And then he kind of coerces her subtly into saying this dominant, powerful threat that she will leave him if he loses the match the next day. Mm-hmm. But then they kiss, and it seems like this is a moment that's reinvigorating their romantic bond. And then it completely flips. Because Zendaya turns towards the camera, and you see in her eyes, oh, she's really unhappy that she doesn't like holding the power in this way. She doesn't want to be the one lording power over her two white boys, as she says. That really, both of these men are kind of a disappointment. And even though there are things that Patrick has that she craves and things that Art has that she craves, she says it early on. Krasinski gives it to us clearly right at the top. She wants to have the kind of relationship that tennis provides. The clear communication, the actual interaction towards a competing, but in some ways common goal of victory and respect and admiration and professional ambition. Hopefully not to spoil it, but the movie gives her that in the end.
We can spoil it.
But in a bit of a twisted way.
I think if you put on this 90-minute podcast about challenges, you know we're going to spoil it.
Yeah,
I suppose.
I think it's really interesting because Karitsky's and Guadagnino both say in their interviews that these characters are so immature in a way that the only way that they can communicate with each other honestly and truthfully is by playing the game of tennis.
Yeah.
And that is the only true way that they can be open with each other, is actually by playing this last final. And I think that was so telling in their actions and their sort of lack of actions outside of the court.
I think Art and Patrick are poor communicators and emotionally immature. Do you feel the same way about Tashi?
Oh, yes. Definitely. I think
it wavers for me. I think every watch I feel very differently about these characters.
I think, and this is not to diminish what the actors are doing, I think watching this film, you get a really strong lock onto the internal thoughts that these characters are having, which is a very difficult thing to do in film. There's no voiceover in this.
Yeah.
Right. One of the most difficult things to do. And I think a lot of that strength actually comes from the writing and what you're shown and what they do and the situations that they are in and the decisions that they make.
Agreed.
And because it is going through a history of these characters, you get a lot of material. And so by the end of the film, you know exactly what they're thinking. it isn't necessarily just something that comes through performance. Because sometimes we talk about, oh, I can see what they're thinking because the actor is acting very well and they are expressing this thing, and even though it's unsaid, I can understand them. I don't really think that's what's happening in this film. I think what is happening is that the film has shown you enough for you to piece together the psychology of these three people who are a little toxic and a little fucked up. At the end, you know exactly what they're thinking.
Yeah.
And I don't think the key is performance, even though the performances are pretty good. I think the key is the writing. And that's really why the writing and the structure is really the thing that I take away from this. I think this is really like Kritsky's like opening shot in his career. That is like insane.
Agreed.
Yeah.
It's a masterful script.
Like, give an example. For me, the biggest moment of the film, which for most people is going to be the biggest moment, but it's when the film really like, I was like, okay, this is a big one, was the reveal at the end when Patrick reveals to Art that he slept with his wife.
Oh, yeah.
Right? That is a huge reveal. And so how does it reveal? It's revealed using the narrative payoff of Patrick showing Art the tick that he has when he serves, which we are shown in the flashback from when they are in that US Open the first time they meet Tashi. After that whole thing, Patrick reveals to Art using this tick that he slept with Tashi. He uses the exact same thing in this final matchup to say it again to him. And that's in a way communicating through tennis, right? That you were saying, Wilson. Yeah. But for me, the experience at that moment was like 2 minutes before he does it, I was like, oh, this fucker's gonna do it. And I felt it like so strongly. And I thought it was gonna happen sooner, but I was like in that hit space with Patrick for much longer than I thought, which I think proves to me that it planted so much evidence in my head and I wasn't really actively thinking about it. It just suddenly came to me and I was like, oh my God, this is happening. And that mind melding I had with the character was me realizing, okay, all these things, like I really understand this character just based on what he does and what he chooses to do at every single point in time. And now I'm like, yeah, this bitch is gonna do it. Like, so that really felt like such a testament to the strength of the writing, really. Yeah, that key moment, in a way, like also realizing that means that it would also work in that same way if you were to rewatch it knowing it was happening.
There's a type of I can see it coming type of moment that feels disappointing because you can predict it. And there's a type of moment like that that is exhilarating because you feel smart for putting it together. And that's all because of Kritsky's setup and payoff. And that the setup is so closely tied to Art's weakness of his confidence that it's about Patrick lording his romantic and tennis success over Art and saying, here's your tick, and I'm using your tick to tell you that I'm essentially better than you in bed.
And I think it's not just about like something as simple as, oh, I'm just going to like tell you this thing, right? It's kind of that psychology, like what's he trying to say here? Like what's he trying to do? You know, and like it's not something so simple as just an informational review. It's a character moment of like it makes sense why he does this because it is about the relationship he has with Art. You know, this is how they communicate. This is how they compete. This is how their relationship is like. They like to like compete with each other. You know, so it's not just about telling you one thing. It's really this whole thing. Like it's the whole relationship that they have through tennis and through their friendship.
It's him saying, dude, I know you.
Yeah.
I know you so deeply that I know how to get under your skin with the simplest of gestures.
Yeah.
They do care about each other.
They do, and they also
hug.
want each other to play the best that they've played in that point in the match.
Yeah.
He was doing it to like anger him maybe, but also I think he was doing it to push Art forward.
And it works. God, the payoff in this movie.
Yeah, I mean, like that's like
so
one big
good.
payoff, but there's so many little payoffs that it's just building from the start to the end of the film that it just keeps doing it. You know, just keep paying them off. Like even something stupid like they put up that poster, the big poster of Tashi and Art.
The
on the
Aston
wall.
Martin
And that was just like,
ad.
Just a detail. Okay, yeah, cool. Yeah, they're famous. They have power. That's like what it tells you, right? And then they put it in that scene when Patrick and Tashi sleep with each other the night before the final match.
Yeah.
It's like those are like
and
small
it's
things. You know what I
perfectly
mean?
framed. They're like kissing in the
Yeah.
foreground, and Art's
then
big
Art's
face is in
watching
the
them.
background. Yeah,
Big face.
big face.
Big Face.
Oh God. Okay, yeah. Sorry.
Ben, would you like to explain
Sorry,
Big
I got
Face?
excited. Big Face is this letterbox list I started long ago about the cinematic power of gigantic faces that are shot, not gigantic like close-ups, but like faces that are made big, like in reality.
In the diegesis.
Yeah, in the diegesis. And made big in relation to other people. Yeah. I'm putting it in my list
Face.
right now.
Yes, do
Yes.
it. Do it. We'll link it in the show notes.
Big Face is so back.
Before we move on, I sort of want to spend a little moment talking about dialogue writing, because despite the complex structure of the scenes in this film, I think some of the really, really great work is some of the longer dialogue-heavy scenes that Kurtzkis wrote for these characters, especially the 2 hotel room scenes. One of them, Eli already mentioned, between Art and Tashi the night before the match. But the one that I really want to get to is a scene that builds like from the start of the scene, like it sort of mellowy builds up into a big crescendo at the end, which is when they are in their hotel room the night before their US Open finals, and Tashi comes to visit them, and it's a little it starts off being very casual, how they know each other very well, and then quickly they get into some saucy and horny shit, which leads to some making out.
As Uncle Ace by Blood Orange plays.
Yes.
Oh, that was a Blood Orange song.
Not time specific. That was like, that song was released years after that US Open.
Oh, is that an anachronism? I thought it might be.
Yeah. But it's okay. I'll let it slide because I know Luca loves Blood Orange. I want to zero in on this scene and how fantastic the play of dialogue sort of really angles everyone in the right direction of where this scene is heading. And it's hard to like sort of build from nothing, like sexual tension and sexual desire between 2 people, like not even 3 people. So I think the back and forth and sort of the little things like Art's hesitation to talk about the masturbation story, but Patrick's willingness to, I think that moment spoke a lot to the relationship that those 2 boys had at that moment. And also, I guess, Tashi's intrigue or curiosity and willingness to like push deeper or to dig deeper was also very, very like well placed in that scene.
She's enjoying the process of toying with them both because she has a choice at this point in time in the movie. And that's not to say that she doesn't have a choice later on, but I think a part of this character's psychology is how she was brought up in, it's implied, a pretty intense manner to train to be a tennis all-star. With that taken away, this interaction is part of the old life that she gets to hang on to. So it's crucial that that scene be memorable and intimate and fun and light and also very funny.
Yeah.
It's very funny.
It kind of plays up also the kind of characters that Art and Patrick are
Yeah.
in relation to Tashi, like the confidence level. And it makes sense in this point in time that Patrick's going to win Tashi's affection.
Yes.
It makes sense. But you also see the kind of person that Art is. And like he has that shyness, but he also has an ambition. Like in this case, a romantic ambition, but later on that romantic ambition turns into a professional ambition as well. Yeah. But he doesn't have the same drive that Patrick has, I think.
We are going to be jumping into the cinematography of the film, and we're going to be talking about Sayumbu Mukdipram, one of the greatest living
Legend.
cinematographers, period, has worked with directors like Miguel Gomez, Apichatpong Weerasethakul, Luca Guadagnino, and now is sort of venturing into the world of Hollywood cinema. But Sayombu Muktiprum did not give an interview for this film yet, but I know that he likes to favor shooting on film, and this Challengers was shot on film. And when the actors Zendaya, Mike Feist, and Josh O'Connor were talking about working with Muktiprum, they said that they were really impressed by his command of light. And I think light is something that is a through line through Muktiprum's career. I haven't seen a lot of Apichatpong Weerasethakul films, but in its simplicity, in the bare bones nature of the way that the camera is always on sticks, you can only control a few different things as a cinematographer. But I guess one of the most invisible tools and one of the most powerful tools is lighting. You can think about the infamous story about how the Call Me By Your Name shoot was plagued by like 75% of the days had rainstorms on it. So a lot of that light was supporting the weak natural light and using that to, I don't know, plus his HMIs that he loves to use. I love HMIs too, Muktiprum. I love, to boost the sunlight. And I think similarly in this film, the lighting in this is sublime. It's fantastic. I'm thinking about that long take scene in Tashi's Stanford bedroom that starts as a love scene that turns into an argument where the light is coming in through the window and hitting them on the bed, but a different ceiling light is in the section of the room when Zendaya moves to after calling things off on the bed. I think it's just so subtle, the use of light, but you can always, there's like natural light is always there in the frame, like, or in a scene. And I think as a cinematographer, sort of basing your lighting of a scene based on like where are the actual sources of light in this scene that you can see as a viewer, and sort of amplifying those light sources and playing with those adds to a sense of realism, but also within that realism, the way that you're able to shape and push certain light sources allows you to get very creative and like emotionally charged with the lighting.
I think the cinematography in this is very textured. I've been railing against the kind of Netflix style a lot, which is very lit. And I don't assume that Muktiprum doesn't use lights, but he doesn't light them in a way that makes me feel like, oh, this is like lit, like a studio or like a traditional set. There's a very strong...
It's not flat.
It's not flat. There's very strong textural quality to the use of light. And I want to pick up on what you said about that hotel scene. So these are all room scenes, right? We got the dorm scene, we got a hotel scene, and we got the motel scene between the three of them early on in the chronology of events, right? And if you think about those scenes, like if you compare to the scene where before the final match, Art and Tashi are in the hotel, you compare the lighting in that scene with the motel lighting. The motel lighting is kind of flatter and uglier compared to the kind of like almost vignette bloom of the hotel scene, because it's this expensive hotel, that the lighting and the texture reflects where you are. You know, there's a grunginess, also from production design, the grunginess of the motel room of that Art and Patrick are staying in. But the lighting accentuates that sense that this is kind of like this yellowish cast in that scene that makes more sense. But you can imagine a world in which you apply the same lighting style to all of these scenes. Right, so I think that's the kind of thing that I pick up on with Muktiprum, where you always feel like the world is real.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean it doesn't look amazing. It doesn't look like lush, but it is so rooted in like where we are and what kind of light are we in. It's not like this lighting with a beauty standard kind of goal. You know, it is pretty rooted in space.
Although, as you're noting, Ben, even though it is grounded and reflective of the spaces that they're in, the lighting does echo where the characters are emotionally.
Yeah.
That's a really hard line to straddle.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think all the shots outside with the tennis stuff, especially all the slow motion, the sweat dripping stuff, that shit just looks good. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like, you
it
really enter
does.
like transcendent moments, especially in that final set.
Yes,
You know,
do.
like the lighting,
Yes.
the backlights, the slow motion, the glistening sweat. Like that shit just is insanely good looking.
It's sexy. It's sexy.
I think lighting is one thing, and the other thing is probably just the inventiveness of the cinematography. And I think maybe some of that also comes from Guadagnino because he talks about those shots that he's been wanting to do. So I think that combination of the two of them just trying shit out. Like when he does the point of view shots, I was like, what? I was like, this looks kind of like whack, but like I respect the commitment to doing the first person shots on the court. It looks kind of janky, but I was like, yeah, sure, man.
And then it turns into the first person shot of the ball.
Like picking up the ball, swinging the racket, running around. Like, yeah.
I love that every moment of characters playing tennis, whether or not it's a competitive match, is filmed in a different kind of style. I'm thinking about how after Tashi has her injury and she's training again with art before totally giving up on tennis. It's filmed very planimetrically, very head-on, static, placid, flat, and disappointed, which makes sense because that's where Tashi is right now, and art's failing to connect with her and help her feel better. Compare that with, that moment when you are the ball and just the variety and things that they are willing to try, both kind of excitingly spontaneously and with a lot of intentional design and reflection of where the characters are.
Yeah.
Similarly to what we're saying about the lighting, the movie's ability to do both at once, to be fun and reflective of where the characters are, is pretty remarkable.
You just made me think of something about sports movies.
Ooh.
So the film starts like kind of in media res in the match, that final match. We start with the final match, right? And we get those shots of the match, but with, you know, the telecast information, like the points.
Oh, yeah, on the bottom left.
As if you're watching a match on TV. That's actually
Yes.
a version of the traditional way that sports movies like to frame things, where like they end with like the telecast of the final match that they win. Right. These are like usually biopics and stuff. Like I'm thinking of something like shitty boxing movie Southpaw with Jake Gyllenhaal, which kind of goes with that kind of format where it starts with like all the personal stuff. So all the first few matches are personal and like character focused, and then the last one's about success on the global stage on camera. This is an inversion of that. Like we start with what everyone sees from the public perspective, and then the film is about drilling down into what people are thinking and feeling.
Yeah.
Right? So which is an
Yeah.
interesting inversion when you compare it to other sports movies. Yeah.
Also, as the movie goes on, you realize that this Phil's Tire Town match is super low stakes,
Yeah.
ultimately.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
You think it's
Yeah.
high stakes professionally, and it turns out to be low stakes. And then you think
Yeah.
it's, and then you
Oh,
think
so
it's
good.
low stakes personally, and it turns out to be high stakes personally.
Yeah. Back to Kurtzky's for 1 second because I have a tidbit to. So after watching that Serena and Naomi Osaka match, and committing to making this movie, he got very, very into tennis and watched all like the Grand Slams or the big tournaments. And then after he was done with all of this, he ended up starting to watch challengers matches. And challengers matches, as we know, are very, very low budget. It's a small time tournament in the pro circuit. You only have like one overhead camera covering the whole match. That's what gets broadcast, or that's what gets sent out. And what stood out to Kurtzky is that this is a tournament that's like bumfuck of nowhere. It could be anywhere. But
Phil's
what
Tire
stood
Town.
out to him.
New Rochelle, baby. It's where I passed my driver's test.
Oh,
Nice.
But what stood out to Kurtzky's is that these players still were playing like their lives were on the line, because they're literally their lives were on the line, because this is what sustains their career. They need to win games. They need to win tournaments in order to continue being professional tennis players. So you have this really like country club atmosphere, but the intensity of the players were still there. So that was something that Kritsky's wanted to dive into. But another thing about the tennis matches, Guadagnino never storyboards. But for this film, for the tennis playing, he storyboarded. So him and Muktipram, they had some college tennis players play out the matches for them and watched them play it on the court and decided how to storyboard all those tennis playing scenes. And I think he seemed a little apprehensive in the interview about doing more planning. Like this film required him to do, or not required him, he wanted to do more planning. There was a lot more rehearsals. He never really does rehearsals. He storyboarded some scenes. He doesn't really storyboard some scenes. But in it, I think he's coming to a realization that balance of being prepared and letting spontaneity and realistic like elements or mistakes color the film. Like he's trying to build a balance between these two in this moment of his career. So for his next film, like Queer, he says he didn't rehearse at all. So he's trying to like feel it out based on the script, which is really interesting. But I think you can see maybe development in his career just with how, like, I guess, specific the directorial choices are with regards to the tennis playing.
Should we move on to the next section?
Let's talk about the soundtrack. So the soundtrack was composed by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, very, very infamous musicians, and Nine Inch Nails,
Watchmen, Social Network, Mank.
But also previously Guadagnino's Bones and All. And I think Guadagnino secured the film while he was finishing up post-production on Bones and All, and really loved this working relationship that he had with Reznor and Ross, and wanted to bring them on like ASAP. It was really, really early on when he brought them on. And what he said to them was that I think he wrote an email. He was like, "Oh, I'm making a movie about tennis. It is going to be sexy with like 3 or 4 X's in it." And that's how they got the memo that they were working on Challengers. And he also stressed that I think they were shooting and they were editing and they were cutting it together. And Luca said that there was sort of this natural energy. It felt like fresh entertainment. He said it feels like cold soda on a hot day. That's what the tennis scenes felt like. And that's what gave Luca the idea to make it like a rave party. That's what he told Reznor and Ross. He wanted techno and he wanted it to be like a rave. He assigned different colors to different scenes for different meanings. And he sent the edit to them without the music. They showed it to him with the music. He didn't change the edit at all. They scored it to the edit. And that's how we ended up with one of the, I guess, best movie scores of the past 5 years.
I agree.
It's good.
There's a quotation from an interview that Reznor and Ross gave to GQ that I think is so funny. So it says, quote, "I wish I had his notes," Ross said of Guadagnino. "His notes were so effing funny on what each piece was meant to do." "Oh yeah," Reznor said. "Unending homoerotic desire. It was all a variation on those 3 words." Those are the notes that he gave them.
Oh, so good.
Love it.
The score goes so hard.
It's so good.
And there's so many specific like beats or moments that really like just are attached to scenes in the film in my head. Like I listen to the soundtrack going to work or like going on a run, and I'm like, oh my god, that's the Tashi Duncan US Open Juniors final when she's playing against Anya Mueller and demolishing her on court, where it goes yeah. It's just so iconic.
It's great.
I think the music's great, but I will say one thing. So on our Discord server, somebody mentioned before I watched the movie, comparing the film and the music to Ping Pong the freaking animation, which is still my all-time favorite anime, thanks to Wilson's recommendation.
Probably mine as well.
Yeah, and the comparison is apt, and they're not the only people to make this comparison. And if you want to talk to us about more movies, you should come to the Discord.
Yeah.
And I really wish I was not colored into thinking about Ping Pong going into this movie, because I think comparing the two made it very difficult for challenges to really be its own thing. And it's not its fault. It's not Challenge's fault. You know, yesterday I was listening to the soundtrack and I was like, yeah, this is not bad. Then I went back to the Ping Pong soundtrack. I was like, okay, I still like this more. Like, by a lot. And I'm not saying the Challenger soundtrack is amazing, but like the Ping Pong thing really like gets to another level. And if I can just like talk about Ping Pong like 1 minute,
Please.
I think
go.
the thing about Challengers that I think is lacking for me in terms of what it's trying to do with the sport, I think Challengers is more focused on the relationship. And yes, we're talking about how tennis is the relationship. Tennis is how they communicate. But I think for Challengers, the key is the relationship. That's more important to the story and to the people and to us as an audience. We care more about the relationship. But for Ping Pong, I think there's a better balance about what the sport means to each of them.
Yeah.
Because I feel like Challengers, the sport is in a way beholden to how they feel about each other. But Ping Pong has a purer connection to the sport itself. Like, what does the sport mean to me? Not about how it makes me feel about someone else.
Yeah.
And I think that balance is the thing that I wish Challengers had more.
Right.
Because Ping Pong has this really nice, rounded idea of what sport means and that it means different things to different people. But of course, Ping Pong is a kind of a TV show. It has a little bit more time to talk about those themes. So I'm not trying to knock Challengers for not doing everything within 2 hours, because it's already doing a lot within 2 hours. Yeah, but I think that's the thing that I was like, damn, I wish it wasn't just like tennis because I love my bro and his wife, you know?
Yeah.
Like, I wish it was a bit more than that, you know, because they keep talking about how, you know, all they know is hitting a ball of a racket.
Yeah.
But it becomes so entrapped in the romantic stuff that I guess maybe purity of that relationship with tennis feels a little lost. Would it be better with that? I don't know. But it's just this thing that I was noticing as I was watching it, that it was like, oh, it's really just about them. Yeah, which is fine.
Ping Pong definitely has the starting moments of its characters' relationships to their sport that Challengers doesn't have. It enters chronologically with Art and Patrick already friends.
Yeah.
And already loving tennis.
Anyway, that's my Ping Pong sidebar.
Oh, what a good show. You gotta watch Ping Pong.
Yeah.
For more
please
riveting
watch Ping
commentary about
Pong.
films, join our Discord.
Yeah. Or maybe stay tuned for our Yuasa series, maybe. Who knows?
Oh.
Ooh.
We're promising too many things.
Yeah.
This is going to happen in
We'll get
2050.
to it all.
2046.
On the soundtrack, I did want to say that I love how the score is used, both in terms of the tennis matches in which Italo disco house kind of style music is dropped, but also during the argument scenes, particularly between Tashi and Patrick, because it does a lot to convey the passion that they have and how quickly it kind of burns out when they spend time with each other. Thinking of the argument scene, there are lesser versions of this movie that would score that with dramatic music that really underscores the conflict that they feel for each other in a very typical cliche kind of way. And to play that same house music underneath their argument really does what Ben is talking about, of linking their dynamic to the game of tennis itself. The same music is used for the arguments as it is for the tennis matches.
Yeah. And speaking about that specific argument scene in the dorm room between them,
Yeah.
it is the complementary score with the like swift pans, like whip pans between Tashi stretching on the mat and Patrick sitting on the bed, and the camera goes whap, 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 whap as the score goes boom, 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 boom. And it feels in that moment like a tennis match.
They do shoot the tennis match like that a little bit sometimes.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
And it's all one shot in that bedroom scene too.
Yeah, that long take is fantastic. And yeah, I think it was interesting because Luca's talk was asked a question about being formally forward or being very invisible in scenes and what he thinks about like those two modes of filmmaking. And the quote that he says is so great. He says, quote, "I think being invisible is one of the most striking ways of being formally forward," end quote.
Whoa.
Ooh.
Wait, invisible in what sense? Like
an invisible camera, like a not moving camera. Like I think being like just not making formal choices that are loud to the audience.
I think, early on in this episode, I talked about how like Guadagnino has never really clocked for me. And I think it's because his approach to filmmaking isn't with a sort of specific directorial style. He's not like a Wes Anderson, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. He is very much molding himself to the material, which I think is very commendable because it means he's not there to be like, oh yeah, I am Guadagnino. Like he respects the material, the story too much, and like he thinks about what the story needs and then he does whatever it takes. It doesn't have to be something he has done before. It doesn't have to be something he's used to. And I think that's something that it's why Challenges feels like so different, and which is why it doesn't really, to me, feel like a Guadagnino film. But I think that's the point. Like it's not really like a Guadagnino film. You know, and I think that's actually to his credit, which is interesting.
I have a quote. I was going to save this for the end, but this is the perfect time to put it in. So in that same IndieWire Toolkit podcast interview, he says, quote, "As a filmmaker, I need to try on different textures and genres. I don't want to be pigeonholed. I want to be defined by the sheer possibilities of cinema." So great.
That's awesome.
Love that.
Okay, let's move on. Let's move on to editing. I have not much to say about Marco Costa. He did not give an interview about this movie. I don't think his main language of communications is in English because I think he's been working with Guadagnino since his Italy days. But I would like to reiterate this fact that the first cut of this film was only 3 minutes longer than the final cut, and they only had to cut 3 minutes, and they did that in 1 hour, and boom. That's the power, I guess, of the script combined with the edit.
You know, you, Wilson, I think in your Letterboxd review described the edit as playful, and I think that's the perfect word for it. It feels like it just knows when to bounce and when to hold on. And I really admire the pacing and rhythm. It works in tandem with the music, it works in tandem with the performances, and yes, it absolutely works in tandem with the script.
I think I find it hard to say anything too significant about the editing because it's probably something you gotta like really look at it specifically to understand. I've only seen this movie once and it was like 2 weeks ago. But
it'd be fun to break that down and really study shot lengths
because
across
think
scenes.
about like how varied the shots are and think about how to integrate all that in a single movie. Right, that's difficult. So like I'm just thinking about the challenges that this has to face, but the fact that I don't even think about it shows you how like seamless the edit is, putting all these things together. So I can only really say that because I didn't feel jarred by the edit, despite so many jarring choices on paper, that it really worked.
It's so crazy how many things that is tried in this film. Like I wrote down, there were cross dissolves, there were freeze frames, there was speed ramping to slow-mo shots with high FPSs, but also speed ramping with regular like FPS shots that turned into a technique that Wong Kar-wai really likes to do called step printing in the scene where they're making out at the car. So with this variety of different editing choices, it is crazy to me that this works not only for me, like, or us, like film fans and enjoyers who sort of eat those choices up like crazy, but also works for a general populist audience who is not, I guess, would feel a little weirded out if it was a misplaced cross dissolve or a misplaced freeze frame. They probably wondering what the fuck's going on. But somehow with the propulsion of this movie, they let it happen and they let it affect them as an audience.
I think it's the kind of thing where I feel like modern Hollywood is very safe.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
being safe is when movies die.
Yes.
Yes.
Were we talking about
Love
this?
that.
Where I was like, I think the worst thing a movie could be in this day is boring and safe. Like, I would much rather a bad movie than a safe movie.
Like for me, the movies I really
Agreed.
dislike watching are 3-star movies in the way I think about films. Because it's like,
Yeah.
it's neither good, nor is it so bad that it really makes me think about the film as to why it's so thoroughly shit the bed. But then it's really just has no impression. Then it's like, why did I watch this at all? At least hate is an emotion. Dislike is an emotion. Boring
Yeah.
is not an emotion.
I think we can sort of merge together the sections on production design and costume design. The production design was supervised by Marissa Lombardo, and the costume design was done by creative director of Loewe, founder of J.W. Anderson, in his first film, Jonathan Anderson. So in an interview that Marissa Lombardo gave with the Art Hyphen podcast, she was talking about, I guess, the multi-layered and multifaceted and complicated role that she does as a production designer on this film and in other films. She works very closely with Mukti Prum and Guadagnino in deciding what the look of the film is. So I think she was really enamored by the geometry of the tennis court and the lines and the strong, like very clear, bold color blocks that tennis courts give us. And I think Lombardo was talking about a very intense graphic quality to tennis courts, and I think she really took with it and ran with it. And I think this extends to the costume design and also the set design, which feels very American in a way that brands are so heavily used, and they are used to help color the world of the film, but also color the backgrounds of these characters. Like,
Yes.
Art Donaldson wears Uniqlo during his professional, I guess, in present day matches, and Uniqlo only sponsors 2 tennis players. I'm pretty sure just 2 tennis players on the male circuit, and it was Kei Nishikori, who's a Japanese tennis player, and Roger Federer. So that's sort of like the tier of player that he is. And then you have Patrick wearing his vest that's all run down and his stripy shorts that sort of look mismatched but really work. I think just even those outfits from the final match, you really get a good idea of who these characters are and the importance of production design and costume design in shaping the world around these characters.
So agreed.
I feel like with the costume design, like you have the branding stuff, but you also have something as simple as like that extremely recognizable "I told you" shirt that Tashi wears. Then you realize it's actually not hers; it's actually Patrick's, and then he wears it again at Atlanta.
Yeah.
Like you don't miss that. That's a big choice.
Yeah, when he goes
You
to
know what I
watch
mean?
them
So
in the
when
court,
he appears
it's
again
so
at Atlanta wearing that
Yes.
shirt, you know some shit's going down.
That's
Yeah.
so powerful, that "I told you" shirt, and fucking Jonathan Anderson knows it, so that's why he's selling it for $400 on Loewe.
Ridiculous. It's just print it yourself. What font is that?
What's the link to JFK Jr. that shirt has?
He wore it. I think that's how it's first got made. There's some paparazzi photos of him
Interesting.
wearing it. Those words on his shirt.
Boy.
Yeah. But I don't think there's like a strong. I think they just wanted a really bold shirt to be able to like just pass around between the characters and gain meaning through the film. But I think it was great because I feel like Jonathan Anderson is such a bold creator of fashion. So I was really worried that when he came into this world of challengers, that it was gonna be very, I guess, very pretty looking, but not very like just down to earth or realistic. So I'm really glad that he was able to just really channel that energy into this, just finding appropriate pieces for the characters. And I think that worked really, really well.
Do you have a fave fit from the movie?
I love Patrick's match fit. I think it's so great. I love the Impato vest. It's so good. How about you guys?
And it's high school looking cargo shorts that don't match that vest.
And I think about like there's a few of Tashi's outfits. Like I think the blue dress in the party scene.
Oh, the blue dress.
It's pretty good.
So great.
And her white outfit is pretty classic.
Yeah.
At the match?
Yeah. Yeah, the one where she gets injured. It's pretty clean actually, like the costume design. It's like pretty across the board. Real good.
It is.
But not too really much clean. That like it's announcing itself so much, you know?
The towels in the sauna.
Yeah, it's like a pretty good choice.
That's your favorite. That's your favorite.
I wonder what brand those are.
The churros.
Yeah,
actually,
you gotta.
me and Eli were talking just now. I think you weren't here, Wilson, which was saying that we think the movie would make more money if they dropped the towels.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I think so too. I think so too.
Because I
mean, Josh
X, formerly Twitter, would have gone absolutely insane, and so many more people who have watched it.
O'Connor is no stranger to doing full frontal scenes. He has done it on multiple films before. But yeah.
Right. Maybe because of the rating, less people would come. But who knows?
Think so. I mean, it would have been the same. It would have been the same rating. Yeah, it would have been the exact same rating because it happened in the locker room.
What are we talking about?
Yeah. Lol. Okay. I guess we have a little bit of time left at the end, and we're gonna close it out talking about these wonderful actors that were in the film: Zendaya, Mike Feist, and Josh O'Connor. I think every time I watched this film, I was like so. I don't know. I felt weird about Zendaya at the start of on my first watch. I was like, oh, I think her limitations as an actress is like holding her back. But I think the second and third watches really like sold like this sort of inside like crazy energy that there is to Tashi Duncan, and how she's able to just sort of channel it out in a very, I guess, controlled way for most of the film, but you see it peeking out in sections. So I think right now, for me, like for a long time, Josh O'Connor gave the strongest performance out of the three for them, but now I think Zendaya takes the crown.
Interesting.
After my third watch.
Wow, that's surprising. I feel like I've only seen this once, of course, but I feel like Zendaya felt like such a weak link acting wise, which is a bit of a bummer, because one thing is that when she does 30 plus with the kid, I really didn't buy it. I was like, this is a teenager with a kid. And I really could not buy that. Like, it was distracting every time she was like interacting with the child. I feel like, based on my watch, I think she understands the character. Like, I think she knows what she needs to do, but I think there's a limitation to the way that she makes choices to express the complicatedness of Tashi. Right? And I don't know, maybe it's not the acting. Maybe it's because also the other thing is about the script is that it's actually more about the boys and it's about her. Like, she's a little, as a character, filtered through the men. And so we don't get as much access to what she's thinking and the choices that she makes for us to fully make sense of her internally. So maybe it comes down to writing, but it's really hard to say. And so it's a little bit more difficult to really like get a complicated idea of what she's thinking on a moment-to-moment basis. There isn't the more broad strokes of like, which men does she like? Is she angry? Is she annoyed? Like these are pretty simple, but you don't get the complexity of like the relationships that she has with the two of them, you know? It feels a bit broader than what I can read from her performance.
And also, we're saying that the character, both in how she is brought up and after her injury, has very limited modes of self-expression, or feels that she is not able to express herself in a wide range of ways and still be accepted or successful or what have you. In that sense, I do think Zendaya's abilities are a little limited at expressing a deeper range of emotions, but she works for this role.
Yeah.
I do
Yeah.
think it's a good role for her.
I think so too.
Even when I do agree that on the mom side and on some of the bigger emotions, I don't fully buy her.
I mean, the star power works for what Tashi is when she's
Totally.
big.
Yeah.
That works.
Yeah.
Right? But that's less about maybe her ability as an actor, but I do think that it still works in a larger scheme of things.
She's a
for the
great
movie.
screen presence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, Zendaya's hot as fuck, man. Like,
Yeah,
I'm
she
going to say
is.
it. Yeah.
Yeah,
it's
she
ridiculous. I was like,
is.
what? Yeah.
And so are those white boys.
They are, yeah, I mean. I was reading someone's review about the actors and about how like Mike Fice has a background as a dancer, and he was in West Side Story, and I think that plays
Yeah.
into some of his physicality. Like that scene that I mentioned before in the hotel room the night before the match, where he kind of like crumbles in front of her. Like that really plays out quite physically when he goes into her lap. It's quite nice.
Yeah.
You know, there's
Yeah.
something, I don't know how to say this in a less gendered way, but like something feminine about the way he carries himself that colors his character in a quite a nice way in comparison with Josh O'Connor's performance of
Yeah.
Patrick, which is like very like fratty almost in the way that he carries himself.
Well, maybe to put it into less gendered power terms, he moves pretty submissively,
Yes.
Yeah.
both when he's opposite Josh O'Connor and when he's opposite Zendaya.
Yeah.
He really makes himself small and weak physically, both partially because that character wants to be in that position and also because he's struggling with confidence.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not quite an active choice.
Maybe not so overtly. Maybe you could read a little bit about masculinity in this setup of these three characters.
Oh, definitely.
100%.
Like I don't think it's overtly trying to comment on it, but I think the way that the characters are built, you can kind of read into this in an interesting way where they are not necessarily that Art is less masculine than Patrick, but that he needs to assert his masculinity in different ways. Like in the end, he wins because he gets married to Tashi, right? So that's like a certain kind of masculinity. So there's something really interesting here where like who's winning and who is more masculine, who's more powerful, who's more confident. Like it's not just like obvious. Yeah.
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 Yeah. And in a way, even though he is putting himself in theoretically a submissive position to Tashi by cornering her into saying, if you don't win the match tomorrow, I'll leave you.
Yeah.
He still is exerting control over
course.
what she says in that moment. She doesn't necessarily want to adopt that position.
Yeah.
She is controlling, but in a lot of ways, he controls her, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Because
In
she
some
lost
ways,
all
yeah.
her power when she gets the injury, right? And so she is a little bit, she's kind of stuck with him in a really sad way.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Even though I do think she likes parts of his stability and
Yes.
comfortability and sensitivity, he doesn't have the oomph that Patrick does.
Yeah. I think that's what's really fun about this film. Like the characters are so complex. You can really
Yeah.
lock into what they're thinking about. And like it all makes sense. And I think that's really, once again, down to the writing.
Yes,
Down
it
to the writing
is.
and also down to the performance and,
the direction.
something that Wilson brought up in I think his Letterboxd review again was that Luca Guadagnino gave them a lot of pointers on very small gestures and
Yeah.
things to do. Like I'm thinking about when Patrick and Art are reunited at Stanford and Patrick chases Art over the net of a separate tennis court, or when they throw the ball to each other and Patrick kind of catches it and stumbles and catches it again. They make the bodies feel very lived in.
Yeah.
The churro scene, goodness
Churro scene.
gracious.
Oh, goodness gracious.
It plays out who they are and who has power in those small physical details, which Luca Guadagnino is so good at making feel tangible.
Yeah. There's a really lived in quality to this film that I guess applies to a lot of Guadagnino's films in general.
Totally.
Despite like a overarching like style or something, I think that's something that is very true to Guadagnino's cinema is the realism to it, or the heightened realism.
What a great movie.
Yes, it is currently my favorite movie of the year. I think it will stay that way for maybe a long time. We'll see when we do our 2024 year in review. But we also still haven't decided what Guadagnino film we are going to do next. So we're probably going to close out another director series first and then jump back into Guadagnino after we are done. But yes, stay tuned. We are definitely going to be covering more Guadagnino on the podcast.
Awesome.
Cool.
Challenge accepted.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Deep Cut. Please rate and review us because that helps us keep making the show. Be sure to subscribe to us where you listen to podcasts so you'll know when our next episode drops. You can keep up with us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Letterboxd at Deep Cut Pod. You can join us to talk about movies and anything else on our Discord server. We now also have a Patreon. If you want to support us, we would deeply appreciate it. You can click the link in our description or go to deepcutpod.com to find our Patreon, Discord, and all the other socials that we've mentioned above. Deep Cut is hosted, produced, and edited by us, Ben, Eli, and Wilson. Our cover art is designed by Justina Yam, and our theme song is composed by Eli Sands. I'm Wilson.
I'm Ben.
I'm Eli.
Take care, and we're looking forward to talking about more movies with you next time.
Yeah.